Hello, I'm Joe Ewens, and this is the Vixio Gambling Compliance podcast. When it comes to sports betting, the USA of today looks dramatically different than it did 10 years ago, and we wouldn't be where we are now without today's guest. As the longtime regulator of New Jersey, David Rebuck was at the spear tip of regulatory reform for gambling in the US and was a key part of his state's successful legal bid to overturn PASPA, and in its wake usher in a new era of gambling in the States. David retired from his post at the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement in February this year, and is this year's very worthy recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award at the upcoming Vixio Global Regulatory Awards. He sat down with our chief analyst, James Kilsby, to reflect on his more than 13 years in gambling regulation and what the future might hold for an industry he helped shepherd into being.
All right. Firstly, Director Rebuck, thank you very much for joining us, and many congratulations on being the 2024 recipient of the Compliance Lifetime Achievement Awards at the Vixio Global Regulatory Awards. Very well deserved, and may I even say perhaps even overdue recognition of your career as a regulator in New Jersey. Good to kick off, I guess, thinking back to your when you started as director of the Division of Gaming Enforcement. It's fair to say I think you're confronted with two major initiatives almost right off the bat. You didn't have much of a honeymoon period or a time of being a steady hand on the tiller immediately. Firstly, you had a really significant regulatory restructuring of how land-based casinos in Atlantic City were overseen, and then fairly soon after, legislation was passed and signed into law by the then Governor Christie of New Jersey, that, for all intents and purposes, put New Jersey right at the forefront at the very beginning of being the first US state to fully regulate online casino games, internet gaming. With iGaming, internet gaming specifically, how conscious were you at that time, and how conscious was your staff that New Jersey was breaking new ground? And if you think back to that point, how much of a leap into the unknown was it as a state regulator, being the first really in the US to embrace iGaming?
Well, James, I'll be happy to address that. But first, I want to just thank Vixio and your team for the recognition. I'm really honored by it. I have a high degree of respect for Vixio and all the writings and all your efforts in this industry, and you're a leader, your company's a leader. And when you get an award from a company that you recognize, and I think most regulators do, and even most of the industry does, is a solid company that reports factual information in a very transparent way, it makes the award that much more enjoyable to me. So again, thank you to the team that nominated me. I don't know who they were, but I appreciate their effort, and I do greatly appreciate the honor of being awarded.
Oh no, it's certainly well deserved, and recognised by independent judging panel outside of Vixio. So extend our gratitude to them. But
thank you.
It's definitely a due recognition of your career. So
right. To answer your question, going back almost 13 years, I came in, I was nominated by the governor and confirmed by the Senate to lead the division. And people seem to forget, but at that point in time in New Jersey, the casino industry, which is solely located in one city, Atlantic City, was comprised of almost 13 casinos. And they had been regulated by the state since 1976. And they had grown considerably through the years when it was a monopoly in New Jersey on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And things changed drastically, probably 10 years before I got there. And the industry was struggling. And the industry, when when Governor Christie was elected, came to Governor Christie and said, we need relief. And where we need relief more than anything else is we need to change the enabling statute that was drafted almost 40 years ago. And it needs to be modernized. And it needs to be modernized for many, many reasons, because the industry, the gaming industry, casino gaming industry, had changed considerably in the United States since, obviously, when New Jersey went live. It was the second state in the country beyond Nevada. When you looked at the regulations at that time, the new law came through and set an expectation that there would be significant changes. Like most laws, when they're passed, and statutes when they're passed, there are those who are naysayers, doubters, including stakeholders, that the changes, the revisions, the efforts to effectively implement the new law, to bring about the changes that are required, bring about the relief, bring about the modernization, just aren't going to happen. Or they're going to happen in such a slow period of time that that it's really not going to be very helpful immediately. The challenge we had at that time, because we did not have online gambling at that time, there was obviously a bill going through the legislature to allow online gambling in New Jersey, but that was still in its infancy stages back in 2011. So it's very clear what had to be done first and foremost was to modernize and create in a very timely way the changes that were expected by the administration, by the industry, and all other stakeholders, and to remove the doubt and and take away from the naysayers the belief that the government really isn't going to do anything to make adjustments to help us. And I had great support from the Attorney General and the governor's office to move forward quickly and get things done in a time frame that was not normal. And when you come to deal with regulation in any form of industry or oversight by a government. So the second thing we did, and I had the ability to do with my staff, is very much tell the industry, you're going to be at the table with us. And we created 10 separate subgroups, subject matter experts, mandated that every casino have a representative on each of those 10. In those subject matters, they had a time frame to get their review done and to submit the recommendations and changes so we could move them forward quickly. And we really made the industry work. We had people obviously from the division who were the lead subject matter experts, but they know very clearly in their own mind that we were going to make these adjustments and we were going to do them. And unless there was something that was imminently outside the scope of what the legislation was going to allow, we were going to be very aggressive in getting it done. We needed to have the infrastructure set to move forward. And we did that. And we got it done in 1 year. And then I went back to the industry the next year and said, you're not off the hook. We're doing it again. They weren't happy, but I meant, you're coming back. We're doing it again. And they did it again. And then in the third year, I made them come back again. And then they knew we were very serious when it came to regulatory reform and modernization and the use of things to do that even in their minds weren't even possibilities back in 2011. So at that point in time, we had a very good relationship with the industry. They now knew that we could deliver on our promises as an administration. And they then, in the fourth year, they asked me not to do it again because they were happy. They were done, and we did. So by that time, James, as you know, now we have this new law that went through a series of reviews, actually vetoed once, conditionally vetoed. It didn't happen immediately. No, but by the time you're getting now 2 years into my tenure, you're very conscious, or I was very conscious, this is coming. Okay, this is going to happen. And we began to prepare. And we knew right off that we had no expertise when it came to regulating an online gambling platform. But we also knew that in the United States, the casino industry, the core casino industry that I regulated in Atlantic City, they had no expertise. They didn't know how to do this. In fact, they were very nervous about it at many days. They saw the financial benefits, obviously diversify your product offering to create opportunities, but they were not, in my mind, ready to embrace it. Certainly they didn't have the infrastructure, the people on their own corporations that could do it. And they recognized very early on that this new industry, if it was going to take off, they would have to either acquire a company, right? And a company, normally that company was overseas.
Yep.
Or to partner with the company who, again, was overseas. And the platforms that existed in the United States, those B2B companies were totally committed to retail. And their expertise in quickly moving into the online world was also not there.
Yeah.
Just not. It was, you had online poker in Nevada, and then you had some form of online gaming in the state of Delaware, which they did a nice job, but the state of Delaware, population based that's going to be gambling in that state is not that large. It's probably only about a little more than 1 million, well, total population, it's a little more than 1 million people, let alone adults. So the test was New Jersey. And could we do this? And so we did a few things to get ready. One, sent my team of people out to Europe. I wanted to know who were the best and brightest countries that had regulatory schemes in place. And we visited many states and many people who led them. We went to the companies that were based there, and most of it was in the UK. Spoke deeply with Australia. We looked at Scandinavian countries. We looked at France. We looked at Italy. And when we came back, we were going through all the pros and cons and what existed in Europe. We quickly realized that we didn't have a flip of the switch situation in our mind. We couldn't copy any of them. I was less than impressed with their regulatory models, okay, as it related to what I knew we had to do in the United States, because I didn't want to make the regulatory model so distinctly different than what already existed in the retail model. And so the licensing standards were much higher, much greater in the United States than what existed in Europe for the people, the companies that would have to come in and engage in the offerings if they were able to get into a partnership with a casino. And we had a lot of comments and input from these corporations, and the jurisdictions. I have to say, one executive director in Europe, Jenny Williams from the UK,
Gambling Commission.
Wonderful. She was head of the Gaming Commission in England. She opened her doors and let us look at everything. And a lot of what they had, we looked at and felt, okay, we can work with that. We can make it stronger. We can make it better. But at least there was a baseline to work off of in developing our regulatory standards. And as you know, on our regulatory model, the legislature in its distinct wisdom told us, you got 9 months to get this done, and everybody's got to go live in 9 months. Who wants to go live if they're ready? So the pressure on our staff and the amount of time and effort we spent in working on this was astronomical compared to our work that normally had with dealing with the existing casinos. And my success today is, without a doubt, the success of that staff, my staff, who delivered and worked exceptionally well, threw away all their egos, worked together in one silo to get this done and get it done with input from as many people as we could get input from. And as you know, we went live within the 9 months. And I believe we launched 6 platforms. Yeah, 6 platforms for 6 casinos. and only one didn't make it out of soft play. So we were off to the races with being live in the time frame that was established. Now, that's how we got there. And there's a lot more stories after November of 2013. That was just the launch. And it was nowhere near the success in the first few years, certainly more than a few years.
No,
is today.
Two things I hope to ask you about on that was the early months of New Jersey's iGaming industry. It's kind of easy as we 10 or so years later. Online gambling and online sports betting is so much more well established and part of everyday life in some respects in many parts of the country in the US. But at that time, I think there was a great deal of skepticism around whether internet gaming could be regulated. There was a very prominent political campaign by one owner to abolish and make establish a new federal law to make online gambling illegal.
Yeah.
I think it's probably fair to say that had there been a significant problem in New Jersey at that time, could even have sort of fueled the fire to ban all online gambling going forward. There were, opponents of online gambling in Congress were just waiting for a significant failing of underage gambling or geolocation or fraud or something.
Yeah.
Were you conscious of that at the time? That
absolutely.
I
mean, we were going up against.
It was on, wasn't it?
It was beyond the stress of delivering on the promises of the administration and the legislature in the state of New Jersey. You're absolutely right. The external sources that did not want it to happen were led by one of the most powerful, financially wealthy persons in the United States, who influenced tremendously gaming policy, particularly in Nevada.
Yeah.
So he was not coming at us in a way that he did not have an expertise in the world of gambling. And I was bound and determined that whatever we did, we were going to have a regulatory model that was going to be successful and was going to shut him down. So I took it personally, and I used every time I could to tweak him personally, because as you know, his company had online sports wagering already. But he's vehemently opposed to online gambling, which is essentially, an arm of, it's not exactly just sports wagering, but it's online internet gambling on casino games as opposed to just sports. So, as you mentioned, the biggest at the time, the biggest challenge we were faced with, without a doubt, was conforming to the Wire Act and the geolocation standards to ensure that everybody who was gambling was within the borders of your state. And that product didn't exist anywhere. So as we opened up our dialogue with companies to come in and have that as a B2B operator, or even the B2C operators, or even the casinos, it became very obvious that we're going to plow new ground here.
Yeah.
Because the existing use of geolocation in the state of Nevada for sports wagering and poker essentially bumped in the borders of the state of Nevada by 40 miles.
Yeah, you was talking about cell towers and
right.
Yeah.
They took a risk.
Yeah.
If you're within that 40-mile window, you're out, even if you're in the state of Nevada. Well, as we know, in the state of New Jersey, if we bumped in our borders by 40 miles, we wouldn't have much left in New Jersey.
The whole northern New Jersey.
We got a lot of people that live in New Jersey now, almost 9+ million, well, more than 9 million people. But if we bumped in our borders for 40 miles, we're probably going to lose like 90% of the people who are going to, be of an age to gamble. So that was not going to happen. And as we went through the process with the companies that were at the table, their solutions were failing, and they dropped out. And at the end of the day, we only had one company left. And we tested it, and they tested it, and we got to the point where we were comfortable with their model. Now, our guys were with them, our technical people. They were sharing ideas. Obviously, the Wi-Fi cell tower approach went away from the IP-only address approach. And you can have that as a component of it, but you have these multi-factor points to zero in on where a person is actually located. And when we went live, we had tested it beforehand, but when we went live, we have a map of the United States in my offices that essentially looked at everybody who was trying to get on from wherever in the United States and determine if they were successful or unsuccessful, what device they were using, things like that. People who have been in our office have seen it before. It's one of the best decisions we made to geo-comply. We want this map, and we want you to show this to everybody. And the standards we put into place of how often the person would be checked basically were dependent upon what kind of device they were using, whether it was a cell, laptop, things like that. And I'll never forget, in looking at that map that day, it was so obvious that dots were popping in Washington, D.C. left and right in government buildings. And they weren't getting it. They weren't getting it. And we subsequently had a talk with the Department of Justice and their cyber people and how we did it and how it looks. And they walked away going, it's a pretty good product you got there. And we never were ever challenged by the Department of Justice for allowing people to wager from out of state in the state. We had people get through occasionally, but it was usually such a minute, unusual action that we found it, and then we shut the door.
Yeah,
but it wasn't as though the general public in New Mexico could jump online and get on immediately. So that was, in my mind at the time, the biggest challenge, that I was worried that we would not go live, because if we didn't have geolocation, an effective geolocation model, we would have been in big trouble.
Yeah.
And we had to make a decision. What are we going to do now? And I'm glad we never had to do that, because, even today, when you talk about geolocation, there's really only a few companies out there that provide that service in the gaming industry.
You sort of alluded to this. You mentioned about going live, and I think it's fair to say that the first few years of legal internet gaming in New Jersey were underwhelming from a new perspective. I do recall the CEO of one operator that was in the market described the New Jersey market as a regulatory success but commercial failure.
I remember that.
But then that changed really quite quickly. 2019, 2020, and to 2024 year to date and beyond, we have seen a dramatic climb in iGaming revenue, exceeding $2 billion annually. Obviously, mobile sports betting is another billion or so on top of that as an online gambling market. So does that surprise you that you had a slow start and then had a market that took off like a rocket? And why do you think that was? Is it strictly the addition of sports betting as a
No, not at all. In my mind, there were a number of factors. It's one of the other items I remember that was quite newsworthy, and I got killed on, but I never said it, and I don't know who came out with it, but it became a public statement from our treasurer, was that in the first year of online gaming, the state was going to generate $1 billion in revenue. And as you properly highlighted, it did not happen in year one. But whoever said that, and even if the governor said that, it's true today. but it wasn't true in year one.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors here in my mind that were coming into play. One, the casino industry was the license holder of online game they were the licensee.
Yeah.
Partnerships, they had to enter into partnerships. They were unprepared for online gambling. We had other situations that I would point to. I think the general public didn't trust it. They weren't ready for it. They didn't want to jump into it. They were very skeptical that the games were not fixed and the outcomes were rigged and that the computers were just ripping them off. Another issue we had was the payment processing system was horrible. Many banks, probably 50, the credit card industry, probably half the banks that issued credit cards would not accept transactions for online gambling. They thought it was too risky. They were worried about chargebacks, fraud, all those kind of things. There were no mercantile codes at the time that were uniquely situated to online gambling. Even fantasy didn't have the mercantile code, even though they were live. And with the work of people like Joe Papano, Omar Sadar, and Sightline people, educating, and we were educating and showing them the data and looking at the chargebacks and the fraud reports, slowly but surely began to convince the commercial industry, the banking financial industry, that, wait a second, this isn't that risky a proposition. All that they do to identify somebody, their chargeback rates are less in gaming, online gambling, than what we have in Amazon for making a purchase. And the evidence was there, which gave them everything. And then American Express came on. And then Discover came on. They weren't there. So it became more convenient. Their debit cards could be used. I mean, it just became more and more convenient for people to engage in online gambling. A couple other factors hit. One, the naive people in the Division of Gaming Enforcement, we felt that the first type of gambling that would be presented online would be the live dealer. We had a whole state used to 40 years of gambling at casinos, interacting with people, seeing them live, having that entertainment engagement. Well, live dealer didn't exist. The industry, the casinos, their partners, they just didn't, it was going to be successful. They just want to roll out the computer-generated games. Tillman Fertitta, he takes a chance. Boom. All of a sudden, live dealer hits and people gravitate to it like it's candy because they're not worried about being ripped off.
Yeah.
They're talking to them. They're seeing a person. They're seeing the cards. They're seeing the game. And it's being recorded. There's no money transfer going on, but the game itself, it's legitimate. There's no cheating. And people are watching the dealers like a hawk, and their supervisors watching them too to make sure they don't make a mistake. And people began to have a level of confidence in that type of game that then moved, I think, into other forms of gambling online that weren't live dealer. And then we had the terrible situation in the United States and then probably in the world. COVID hits. COVID hits in 2020. All the casinos in the United States are down, closed.
Yeah, totally closed.
The only place you can go in New Jersey to gamble legally is online. And people gravitated to experimenting with opening accounts on the online industry like they had never done before. And then, as you mentioned, in 2018, we win the Supreme Court case on sports wagering. And now you have the synergy of sports wagering that people gravitated to because they had full faith in it and trust in it online. But the content that was available was certainly not anywhere near the content on online gambling for gambling. And so after your favorite baseball game ended or football game ended, you're dark on the sports site. and you can just easily move in your account, if you wanted to the online site. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly that online sports wagering was definitely adrenaline shot to online casino gambling. Because when you go to the sites now, it's so obvious. You have a single wallet. You can move between sites without even leaving your site. Yeah. So if you're with company A, you can go to tab A, B, C, pick what type of gaming you want to do online, whether it's casino, sports, fantasy, bop. And it's proven to be a very powerful tool to have the success that we now have seen in New Jersey.
When New Jersey won the Supreme Court case in May of 2018, did you then have there was no law that was actually passed in the state of New Jersey at that time, so
right.
Maybe you're thinking more conceptually than in terms of like specific implementation, but did you have a vision?
Oh yeah.
To try to marry up sports betting and iGaming? Was that an important thing? And were there any other?
Well, here's where we were at that time. And I think we were very fortunate in New Jersey for moving into sports wagering as quickly as we did. We were fortunate for a couple of reasons. One, by that time we had 5 years experience in the online casino gaming world. The regulations, the challenges that we dealt with in that 5 years, the experiences we had, we kept on moving forward and adjusting and manipulating and making it better, stronger, more powerful regulations based on experience. So that some of the initial regulations we promulgated for online gambling, we saw some weaknesses. And as you know, we updated them. Cybersecurity, for example, responsible gaming, KYC standards we even changed to tighten up based on our review of the current standards. That being said, the operators were also then very prepared, knowing that it's a new game, but the platforms and the standards are going to be almost the same. The games are different. You have to be uniquely conscious of the challenges of that game, but the underlying infrastructure that allows you to reach your customer isn't really not going to change that much. No. Okay. So I remember distinctly, James, and I got in trouble for this actually with the new administration, because if you remember, I was appointed by Governor Christie and his term ended in January of 2018. And
the Christie case became the Murphy case.
Yeah, when you're a division director or a cabinet officer, or you're appointed a member from the administration and you have a new administration come in, you submit your resignation. You have to. I mean, it's normal. It's not unusual. So I'm at ICE and in 2018. And I see in the future, we haven't won the case yet, but I was at the Supreme Court hearing on December of 2017, and walking out of that, my expectation was, and I think the expectation by a lot of people that saw that legal argument, we're going to win. We're going to win this case. Now, we may be wrong. You know, I'm not going to predict what the Supreme Court's going to say, but our feeling at that time, we're going to win. And in order that we're going to win, this industry needs to be prepared, because we're not waiting like we did 9 months. I mean, if we win this case, I'm not waiting another 9 months to go live with sports wagering the way we did with online gambling. First come, first served. We are going live. And what needs to be done are the following things. One, I need to have regulations in place. Now, as you said, I didn't have a law, because you remember, as part of the strategy, we had a law that was first passed and you know, that the feds got an injunction on. And when I look back on that, I'm like, those regulations aren't worth a dime today. They're terrible. Thank God we didn't go live with sports wagering in that back then. So we have a whole new group of regulations, and anticipating, well, we need a new law because the law that we made changes to would have basically made it decriminalized, and why would you even need regulations?
Yes. Yeah.
So we drafted regulations, began to draft regulations, anticipating what the new law would be. And that's hard to do because the legislature doesn't have it. But we also worked with putting together a draft to share with the new administration. Say, you ought to consider this in your dealings with the legislature. This could probably work. Again, and then at ICE, I got in a little trouble because I came to the foreign countries, the foreign operators, basically, because again, the U.S. casino industry was ill prepared for this, and the racetracks were not ready. They couldn't run it themselves.
No.
Okay. The Nevada model for sports wagering was not going to work in New Jersey because it was so heavily dependent on driving people into the retail environment. And we just saw it completely different, that it's going to be a very powerful online product, and we needed to prepare accordingly. So we went to the industry. I remember at the time, I got in trouble. I said, okay, you need to do three things. One, you need to find a partner in the United States, whether it's a casino or a racetrack. And you need to begin the negotiations now on what you're going to offer them and whether or not they're going to partner with you. Because at this point in time, they're going to have more than one operator, and more than likely the legislation will dictate if they have skins, and if they're going to have how many, maybe 3, maybe 5. I have no idea, but they're going to have one, and you better find a partner. 2, you better hire a good lobbyist, because that lobbyist is going to be able to influence the legislation, as you said, that's going to dictate what sports wagering is going to be in New Jersey. Because that legislation needs to be executed upon and passed after you win the Supreme Court case. And the last thing I said, you need to get over to the United States right away, because if you're not licensed by the Division of Gaming Enforcement now, there's no guarantee I'm going to approve you and license you unless you get your application in now. And you got time on your side to start getting it in and hiring a good local attorney who's going to walk you through the process. Because without that license, you're not going to be operating in the United States. And then I came back to you here and you said what? I said, yeah, I said it from my heart. I think we're going to win this case, and that's what they need to do. Aren't you getting a little ahead of yourself? Maybe, but then again, I may not be the director. And then I was approached by the governor, and he said, I'd like to keep you on. I said, I'm happy to do it, and I'll give you my best effort. There's not politics involved in this. I want this to work, and I want it to be a success for our state, and that means everybody. You, Governor Christie, me, the legislature, everybody. I want it to be best. This can be regulated in a way that we are proud of, because we're going to create new ground. I mean, I don't have a model to copy.
Yeah.
Retail environment. Oh yeah, I'll copy everything Nevada did, But on the online world, I don't have anything, except I got to go back to Europe and saw my good friend Jenny Williams again. And Jenny, give me everything you got, man. I gotta, because at least I know what you're doing. And the other thing we did, James, that worked really well for us, my staff when they were out in these countries talking now on sports wagering with operators and countries, they met a fellow named Mario Galea. He was from Malta, ex-commissioner there. They said, online gambling, he's got to help us, which he did. And so I don't want to mislead you to think that we didn't use somebody from his expertise, but I never saw a guy work so hard in his life, and we wouldn't leave the United States to go back home until he got his product done. And we made him work like you wouldn't believe on online gambling. so that what he did with online gambling really created, and based on that work and when we went live and where we were with sports wagering, we felt very comfortable. We're going to be okay on sports wagering. And the rest is history. Governor signed, the legislature passed the law in June. Governor signed it on the 14th. We took our first bet 4 days later, and we're off to the races.
Yeah. I guess with sports betting, again, I think you probably had the concerns that you had with iGaming around age verification and underage play, and fundamentally, could online gambling be regulated? Largely, I suppose they were resolved prior to, over the course of the period from 2013 to 2018, but it was still, to a degree, new ground, market notwithstanding. And I guess, how conscious were you of concerns of sports integrity at that time? And again,
we were very concerned. Very concerned for obvious reasons. If you remember back to 18 and all the dialogue from the industry, we had just fought with the industry for 7 years. There was not a very good relationship
with the sports leagues, with the
sports leagues. Oh my God! And Governor Murphy gave me to go ahead to go out and meet with them and share the peace pipe, and that was one of the messages. You are part of the integrity solution. If you rely on just the government to do it, you will fail. We will fail. This is an issue for all of us, integrity. And we need to have mechanisms to share information quickly, efficiently, and promptly on any suspicion of a lack of integrity in an event by anybody who's involved. And our relationships with the leagues at that time started in 18 after we won, basically won the case and went live. And I've been very pleased. We have individual contacts immediately. I mean, we share information back and forth, not only between law enforcement agencies, but civil investigations associated with any allegation or any suspicion of an integrity abuse. Because again, I had the benefit, and again, this should not be underestimated because many regulators didn't. I had the benefit of, I'm in charge of criminal investigations. I was in charge of criminal investigators, 50 criminal investigators, in addition to a half dozen or more criminal attorneys. And when you're in charge of the criminal side of the house for gambling, as well as the regulatory side of the house, civil regulatory side of the house, I realize you can't share information at times, but that's a wonderful benefit that the state of New Jersey has and was allowed to be created by the legislature and the governors in the past from day one. And it's worked very well. So, yes, they had a role and they've embraced that role. More needs to be done constantly. Education, I understand. The NCAA, probably not as effective because it's such a large organization. But I would give credit to the conferences within the NCAA that the conferences were very engaged and very interested in integrity and moved quickly on their own without directives, from the NCAA on how to do it. They did it. And it's not blaming the NCAA. I'm just saying that the NCAA is a massive organization in overseeing sports in the United States, collegiate sports. And its members are much more than just the major leagues that are revenue generating for sports like football and basketball. Okay. They have oversight, massive oversight in many ways. And they're working at it. I give them credit for that. But I'm just saying, when you're dealing with the major leagues, whether it's the soccer, football, baseball, basketball, even ice hockey, smaller groups in they certainly have the financial wherewithal to put revenue into it to make this work for them, because they know, as we know, that you cannot have this type of scandal occur. Just can't.
No.
And we've seen some problems with individuals who have gone astray.
The so the last 2 or so years of your tenure at DGE, it seemed that responsible gaming and advertising were kind of together. Those were two real areas of emphasis. The division adopted new best practices for each of them and implemented them through 2022, 2023. So I'd hope to ask you about that issue, responsible gaming in particular, because we're also speaking here today with new federal legislation about to be introduced by at least one senator, one member of the House.
Yes.
Really impose quite radical restrictions on online sports wagering in the United States that really would extend quite far beyond the regulations of any other state or New Jersey's best practices by very severely limiting advertising, banning certain marketing practices, banning bonuses. So it does seem as though this area was a focus of you as a regulator in New Jersey and is an external focus of policymakers beyond. I guess I hope to speak to you about that issue and how fundamentally important do you think, how determinative is it going to be for the industry's future going forward? I think we've sort of spoken about the fundamentals of regulation of platform security and geolocation and age verification and preventing sports integrity, but responsible gaming does seem to be an area that does that deserve greater focus, emphasis, and attention? And are there risks here that you think the industry needs to be cognizant of?
No, I think you've hit on the two that I've spoken to the industry about since we had online gambling. And you've heard me use this line before. The Achilles heel for online gambling, no matter how you do it, whether it's casino online gambling, whether it's online gambling for horse racing, whether it's online gambling by state lotteries, whether it's online gambling for fantasy sports, is protecting consumers under responsible gaming programs. That is your Achilles heel. Don't fall into the trap that Sheldon would use that, every little kid can gamble on their phone and, your grandmother is seconds away from losing her home. Okay? And when I looked at responsible gambling, the programs for responsible gambling in the retail world have been around for years. The ability to improve upon responsible gambling practices, to provide information to individuals, to track individuals' behavior is light years ahead because of the technology that's available to you with every account holder who's gambling. And whatever technology a business has that is provided to its marketing staff, in New Jersey, our standard was all that information will be provided and access to that data will be available to your compliance people and your RG people. So the marketing people aren't going to have any benefit of having access to information on Dave Rebuck than anybody in the compliance and responsible gaming side of the house. And monitoring through algorithms, people call it AI, I call it algorithms. I mean, a tracking mechanism where you develop protocols and standards of when certain actions are undertaken or performed by an individual while they're gambling online at your site that will then result in a flag and require a response from your RG staff, either automated response, personal interaction, or subsequently further review of whether or not to even keep them as a customer. And so I think that message to embrace technology for the online industry that I deal with has been accepted, has been dealt with, and they have been very good at moving forward and doing things that have never been done before in the gaming world. And when I say that, I say the gaming world, I look at this broadly. I get very frustrated at times that people are only focused on responsible gambling as it relates to casinos and sports wagering. In New Jersey, there's 5 different legal forms of gambling. Actually 6 if you count fantasy, but even though in our state they chose to say it's not gambling. Mm-hmm. Dave Rebuck still calls it gambling, but the better fantasy sports companies will put in an RG program because they can.
Yeah.
But my point being, there needs to be a comprehensive approach to do this. The balkanized approach of overseeing this right now does not work. And if anybody believes that the only people who struggle with responsible gambling or problem gamblers or addicted to gambling are those who gamble at legal websites, at casinos, at legal websites on sports wagering, or at the casino itself, online casino, you're very naive.
You think
so we need to do a better job across the board. And I don't want to go into it now, but it's my personal opinion that many legal forms of gambling, state authorized forms of gambling, state operated gambling are not doing enough. And they hide behind all the challenges that are presented to the commercial and tribal jurisdictions that have casinos and to the few states that have online gambling and those states who have online or have sports wagering. And in my position as regulator, those groups I just mentioned are leading the RGO. Can it be better? Absolutely. Is there research that's being done now? Yes. Is there better educational programs that can be done in the future? Sure. You saw an announcement yesterday. All right. 4 groups coming together for once saying, yes, we're going to come up with a plan, an RG plan, training plan for college students. Wonderful. Great. Funded by the industry. More research is needed. And in New Jersey, on online gambling and online sports, we have an academic university, Rutgers, that does research on all gambling that occurs in those areas. And people have to understand, they're not doing a random sampling of gamblers.
It's actual
provides them with every data element that an account holder engages in: deposits, games played, win, loss, and it's encrypted. You have millions of records going to them to analyze. It's everything, and it's paid for by the industry. And then the academic side of the house will do its research to look for best practices or weaknesses and make suggestions to regulator, and it's for him or her to utilize in improving upon best practices that need to be done. That research, no jurisdiction in the world has that level of research. And I've given that encrypted information to every regulator who wants it to say, go ahead, do it. It's going to cost you a lot of money, but push it off on the industry. They're already doing it in New Jersey. They have to. So you're right. Yes, RG. Now, as far as advertising, I qualify advertising with promos. I think the industry has, the European method of promos was very weak, very misleading, and we eliminated it in New Jersey. It took me a while. I mean, there were violations, but that is going to be a challenge for the industry and the on the promos they offer, because some of them are, in my point, were just outrageous and they had to eliminate them. And for advertising, I think what our experience here, the first time the federal government got upset with advertising, and James, you remember this, I'm sure, is the craziness that happened in the fantasy sports world in football season back in, I think it was 17, wasn't it? 16?
Just prior to the...
They were at a fight with each other, the two companies, a scorched earth policy to say one of you is going to crash and burn because you can't afford everything we're doing in advertising. And they went at it left and right with advertising, spending inordinate amounts of money. And then people got to the point where they're so frustrated with it, the federal government jumped in and said, what's going on? And then the state attorney generals jumped in and said, wait a second. You guys this is gambling, cease and desist, can't have it anymore. And so with the advertising that's done now for the groups that are doing it, even though I hear that, I'm told that they spend less now than they used to, I still believe that when you add all the advertising that goes on all forms of gambling, whether it's sports, online casino itself, state lottery, there's gambling in our country is growing and growing by leaps and bounds, not just in the area that I regulated.
Yeah.
And all of them advertise. And the focus is primarily on the groups I regulated. They probably do more than others, but when you add it all together, it becomes overwhelming and people just click. They just are raising questions. This is out of control. So I do believe that, again, the legislators will look at this because of complaints, and the complaints have merit in my mind if the RG side of the house, those who are addicted, those who are compulsive, those who are problem gamblers, are unable to control their behavior, and then they obviously are committing harm to themselves or their family. If there was nothing on the RG side of the house where the people were seeing the advertising, it's like election advertising. Yeah, I want to turn it off too, but I don't think I'm harmed, I'm not harmed by the fact that, I want to, slit my wrists because, I'm hearing so much and I can't control my behavior. I can just turn it off. But the risk you have with self-harm because people can be addicted and are addicted to gambling is driving the attention to advertising.
Yeah.
And so I go back to saying we need to do more in RG. We need to do more to educate people. And I would also say that where we are weak as a country, I'll blame government. Our public health agencies and the investment of resources that they put in to treat people, to counsel people, to provide remedial assistance for those who are addicted, no matter from what form of gambling, needs to be improved. Needs to be improved. I'm talking about problem gambling, people who have an addiction and cannot help themselves. If they have a lot of money, they're going to get all the help they need. I'm not worried about them. I'm sad that they got addicted. But the people who don't have the resources for treatment, for counseling, for care, that's who I worry about. And they're there. And whether it's because they are gambling on Bovada or Slate or MyBookie AG, don't matter to me. They still need help.
Yeah.
How are you going to get it to them? And I believe that our country is focused on other forms of addictions properly, but there's lessons to be learned from how we dealt as public health agencies with those addictions to the addiction of gambling. And I challenge them to step up, because it's not going to be a regulator, and it's certainly not going to be the legislature unless there's a high level of attention to what services are provided today and what better services can be provided in the future. Okay? Because even if you take advertising away and put all these other restrictions in, you're still going to have a weakness where people are not being cared for in a very compassionate way when they get themselves into trouble. So, I mean, this legislation from the feds doesn't surprise me. And quite honestly, I think it's up to the industry to forge ahead even more aggressively to continue to focus on doing things in a better way than ever before. And I have every confidence in the world they will. I have every confidence in the world they will. And if they don't, then shame on them.
Thanks, David and James, for their time and wisdom. The winners of our other global regulatory awards will be revealed at a glitzy ceremony in London on December the 4th. Head to GamblingComplianceAwards.com for all the information on the event. That's all for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.